What's up, guys? Swift here. I got my guy Glynn Morgan in the house, and today we're going to talk not just about the Bears, but about the NFC North and about the other draft classes that they had. Because as much as we want to take the NFC North, we still got to keep an eye on these other teams because this is, I believe, it's one of the best divisions in football. It's definitely up there, and it's from top to bottom the toughest division, I would say. And now we have new quarterbacks coming in. I think the loss of Kirk Cousins obviously weakened the Vikings, but they reloaded and got JJ McCarthy. Killer record in Michigan, but not my top quarterback prospect. Glenn, nice to have you, man. How you doing today?
I'm good, Swift, man. Thanks for having me back, bro. It's always a pleasure.
Out of these teams, first off, do you think one of the teams stood out that had the best draft in the NFC North besides the Bears, or?
Bro, that is the crazy thing. I don't think anybody stood out individually. I think this whole division stands out collectively. I mean, I know you just referenced earlier about JJ McCarthy going to Minnesota, but he's not going to start. Sam Darnold is still a very capable quarterback, and let's not forget he was a top 5 pick several years back. I think a number 2 or number 3 overall. Correct me if I'm wrong.
He was, I think, number 3. Yeah,
number 3. So we're talking about, again, a top 3 pick, a guy who, although he was seeing ghosts, admittedly, when he was in New York, I think it's more a reflection of the situation he found himself in. Not too dissimilar that a lot of quarterbacks find themselves in at times when they're drafted with teams that aren't ready for them just yet. Our very own Justin Fields went through a very similar situation. His probably one of the more egregious ones I've seen in quite some time. But with that being said, and I've said this time and time again, as important as the players are and whatever scheme that you have them in, I think it's really important who's the person pulling those strings, who's the scheme master, who the offensive and defensive coordinators are. Those are the two individual positions that really shape and determine how effective a team can be. And I don't think we talk enough about those in relation to the players that are taken and how they succeed or don't succeed. They hit upon here and there, but a lot of times either the head coach gets too much credit or blame, and the quarterbacks clearly get too much credit and blame. And I say all that to say, getting back to Sam Darnold, here's a guy who went obviously from the Jets to Carolina, from a bad to a worse situation, but then found himself probably in one of the best situations to correct and redirect his skill set in San Francisco. So he got a lot of that bad juju kind of expunged, exercise, if you will, those demons. And now he's in a situation where he's going to another very good play caller and an offensive mind in Kevin O'Connell, and a system where terminology-wise, it's not going to be a big jump between what he was learning in Frisco and what he had to acclimate in Frisco to what he'll do here in Minnesota. So my point is, he'll hit the ground running with Justin Jefferson. You've got the other wide receiver Jordan Addison, thank you. And you've got TJ Hawkinson, and then you have a better pass-catching running back in Aaron Jones than you did before, with a good offensive line, 2 solid tackles, and a good defense. And getting to the point of this conversation, the draft, now you've got depth at the quarterback position with JJ McCarthy. And I think the depth in our division might be potentially best situated in Minnesota. And you add on the other draft pick they got in Dallas Turner, who's going to fit Brian Flores' scheme all over the freaking place, man. I mean, the way he's going to utilize him is going to be interesting. Now, how quickly Turner can acclimate to understanding NFL defenses and how, his talents are going to, mesh and where he's going to be utilized, if that's going to be too much at one time, we'll see. But the Minnesota's defense is already pretty aggressive. And now you just added probably the most athletic edge outside element, defensively speaking, who's not a cornerback in this draft. So yeah, man, Minnesota's thing. And then Kyrie Jackson. I mean, dude, a 6'3" corner. You got a guy who can press cover, and that's the last thing we need to have is a big corner to stick with our big wide receiver with a defense that likes to blitz and pressure. And this guy is holding up your timed offensive pass routes. So
I will say, I did see some reps of Rome beating Kyrie Jackson on tape there, so a couple.
Oh, that's fantastic!
Pull out, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, and hopefully that's who he's matched up with when he gets his one-on-ones. But that being said, Kyrie will have a much better defense applying pressure, and he won't have to stick with him as long. So that's scary to me in a way. I'm not terrified. I don't need to go buy a dog. Not that kind of scared, but it's something that's a strong consideration. Like, okay, these teams are talented and they're drafting talented players to fit not only their scheme, but to to counteract what the teams in their division are doing. And that's what you want to do. You want to be able to win your division. So winning your division means you have to know who your opponents are. Knowing your enemy is at least half the battle, if not more than half the battle. So Minnesota off the bat is a bit of a concern because, again, you're talking about a team that was a playoff caliber team a couple of years ago. And I know they won a lot of close games. And then last year, the year before, they lost a lot of close games. So the talent on that team hasn't dissipated completely. And they just, restocked at some key elements and key positions to fit what they do. And that's the most important thing, to fit what they do, to fit who their coordinators are, and that identity that Minnesota seems to be regaining. Speaking of identity, Detroit Lions. If there's any team.
Before you go there, let me touch on the Vikings.
Sure.
They had another guy. I mean, Walter Rouse, the tackle out of Oklahoma, not bad. A guy I liked, a lot of length to play right tackle. But they got the other special teamer, Will Reichard, the kicker in the draft. He's not bad.
Right.
They've had some kicking problems, but
they have.
The nightmare for me with Minnesota was everybody said they were going to trade up and get a quarterback. I wanted them to overpay, trade up, and overpay for J.J. McCarthy, not set right there, and then they didn't have to. They moved up from pick 21, but just to number 17 and still land Dallas Turner, who I didn't think was the best defensive player in the draft, but a lot of people did. He was definitely a top 15 player to me, and that's a guy I don't want to see with Brian Flores on that defense. So as a killer point, I think the Vikings probably stood out, at least on day one. They were the only team that had even a comparative draft to the Bears. But yeah, they probably were the second best draft in day one for sure. But they didn't have many picks after that. So
no, a lot of empty air with some of those picks. But and they'll have concerns going forward, I think, next year, because they moved a lot of draft capital from next year into this year. So they're going to be a little thin, but they'll worry about next year. This year, and I agree with you. I don't think Dallas Turner is a finished product. I don't think he was the best defensive player, but I think in his position, he's the most athletic and explosive. And with a good coach, you can harness that and utilize it to its fullest potential. And that's what's concerning, because he is with a very good defensive coordinator and someone that can utilize his skill set. But again, speaking of identity, Detroit Lions. I mean, these are not my Detroit Lions. These are not my granddad's or my dad's Detroit Lions. This iteration of the Lions is way better, I think, going forward than the one with Barry Sanders and Scott Mitchell and those guys, Kelvin Pritchard, some of those guys that, if they were a playoff caliber talented team. There's a lot more sustainability with this group. This identity with it. They seem to not just the coach, not just a coach, but the city. Very much like we have the Bears and everything. The Lions, I don't know what their little jingle is, but this team really seems to be very reflective of that gritty, hard edge, iconographic way we tend to think of Detroit being at times.
They need a bite your kneecap song off. Bite your kneecaps off song.
Yeah, definitely. Or like, someone like, with some kind of, inkling to some kind of, I don't know, Bow Wow or something.
Eminem could write a song. I know they were using the whole one shot, one opportunity thing for the Detroit draft. They like to play on that, but we don't like the Lions. The only thing I would say about the Lions is they have a great foundation. They have great coaching, great talent in the trenches on both the offensive and the defensive line. I'm not a believer in Jared Goff as a guy who is going to be the reason why that team wins. To me, he's more, if you remember the Cam Newton, there's guys you can win with and there's guys that you win because of.
Sure.
He's a guy you can win with, but you're not going to win because of Jared Goff, in my opinion. So,
okay, do you have to?
No.
Okay. I mean,
not with the top three offensive line and killer running game and killer weapons and a great defense.
That's kind of what I'm saying. I mean, that's been my whole thing. And again, not to bring up, old sores or anything, but that was my whole thing with Justin. It wasn't about Justin or Caleb to me. It was always about the structure and then having enough in place that regardless who your quarterback is, you're going to be able to win. Now, depending upon who your quarterback is, you could win better or win more dominantly or thrive or have that difference maker. And all of that is, obviously applicable to winning in the NFL. But I just, over the years, all this that I've been watching football, I see those organizations. Pittsburgh Steelers are the first to come to mind in my lifetime. Three head coaches, and it's still on the third head coach in my lifetime. I've never seen anybody but Chuck Noll, Cowher, and now Tomlinson. That's it.
And they were all great coaches too. I mean, Cowher's a guy people still talk about. Man, I wish Cowher would come back. I've heard Bears fans say that before we hired Eberflus. I mean, that was over 2 years ago now, but I remember in that cycle there was some rumblings on Twitter. What about the chin? And I'm like, oh.
Here's the thing with the chin. I've always thought he was a good coach. I never thought he was a great coach, but I thought he was a good coach in a great organization. And all of those coaches have gone to at least 2 Super Bowls, and they've all won one. So I look to the structure. I mean, Cowher, who I don't think is the best of the 3 coaches, took who was his quarterback? This dude was Neil O'Donnell. Thank you, thank you. Very average. Like he's not in the. He's not even in the Hall of very good. He's in the Hall of I'm extremely average. and they could have won the Super Bowl if he didn't throw 2 picks, to a very average cornerback. So, but I'm just saying they got there. And even Roethlisberger's first Super Bowl, he wasn't really ready for that. The best pass was thrown by Antoine Randall, Chicagoland's very own. So getting the Super Bowl, and look, the Eagles, they won one with Nick Foles, who was a career journeyman at that point, and they beat Tom Brady. Tom Brady had one of his best passing Super Bowls since his career. And I loved it, but the Eagles won, and Nick Foles caught a touchdown pass and threw a couple, he was a big reason why they won that game. And he beat him here with the Bears, but Nick Foles is he's a
legend, man.
He's the Brady stopper. But
him and Eli. Yep.
Right, him and Eli. So, so my point, it was that, that structure's in place. And so to what you're saying with the Lions, the structure's in place. In golf wasn't the reason why they lost the NFC Championship game. I mean, the players around them, particularly Reynolds, let them down, So golf is still, and the Bears, I think they can play them. They played them very well last year. I think the Bears have that knack, matchup wise. I think we're fine. And no, golf doesn't scare me, but he's consistent. He knows what he's doing. He's been to a Super Bowl. He's been to 2 different championship games with 2 different organizations. So then he doesn't suck,
He's a guy who, I mean, he continues. Goff was a guy, he was the number 1 overall pick. So right. I don't want people to think that he doesn't have talent. Goff was a guy I actually liked a lot at Cal. And then he actually, when he came out, I remember one of the funniest things I ever saw was he did a prank where he, I don't know who it was for, but they showed it on ESPN. He went back to a high school and dressed up as a recruit, and they brought him in. They were like, "We got this new transfer QB," and he came in and he sold it so well. Like he started off just air mailing passes and like yelling at his receivers and looking like a dummy, and people are like, "Who's this guy?" And then like later in the practice, all of a sudden he's poof, just zipping it, and all these guys are like, "Oh!" And they're looking at the other quarterback like, "You're not starting anymore, man." He's looking over there all worried, and then he's like, he took his wig off, and he's like, off, and they're like, "Oh!" But I loved his personality for that. I was like, so he's a guy that I do like. I like Jared Goff. Like him less now that he's a Detroit Lion.
Right.
But he's a guy I just don't see him in the upper echelon of quarterbacks. He's a guy I definitely think, I'm going to knock on wood, but the Lions are capable of winning the Super Bowl, but we don't want that. I think the Bears. I think Jared Goff is the weakness that is the reason why we can beat them this year. That's what I'm hoping for.
But what is the age-old saying, Swifty? You're only as strong as your weakest link.
I know.
And I look at what they drafted, and their issues were at corner, especially on the perimeter. And you got Tyrion Arnold, who I'm surprised fell that far. I thought he might go to the Raiders as far as as early as the Raiders. I thought he might go top 15, and then they backed that up with Ennis Rakestraw Jr., who jumped onto my view board more or less later in the year, but somebody who plays a lot more physical than his size.
I went to the Missouri tape for Chris Abrams' Drain, and because I met him at the Senior Bowl, and he was really cool, and I'd already followed him a little bit, so I was watching a bunch of his tape. And like you said, Ennis, that's a physical guy. So that's 2 good corners there. And Arnold is arguably the best corner in the draft. So
between him and Quinyon, and I think Tyrion is a little more. he's faced stiffer competition and been good. And I think with Quinyon, he dominated in the MAC, but that doesn't mean he
And the
won't be
Senior
very
Bowl.
good. Right. You're right. Oh my God, he stood out so much at the Senior Bowl, which really let me know that this dude he's NFL talent, no doubt. So for the Lions to improve in an area with talented young guys that they don't have to pay for a few years, along with who they got in free agency, along with the success they had last year, with players that fit their identity. I mean, even a guy like Sione Vaki, who played two ways in college, the
And
secondary
the
is a
two guys
safety.
taken after that too. I
Right.
mean, Mekhi Wingo
Wingo.
and Christian Mahogany was a guard, Boston College. I thought he was a guy the Bears would like. I
Yep.
was like, everyone made the Ryan Poles Boston College
Right.
connection. When you saw him on tape, you saw he looked great at the Senior Bowl. I didn't see him fall into the 6th round in the draft where most analysts said the talent fell off after round 5. And then you see these guys I've never heard of getting taken, and Christian Mahogany and Mekhi Wingo falling. It's questionable. It'll be interesting to see how these guys play out, if there was something that was missing from the talent evaluator aspect of it that I didn't really see. I thought they were good players. We'll see how they translate in the NFL.
I think they are too, and based off of the success that the Lions have had drafting the last several years, I'm going to put a little bit of confidence in the fact that they drafted some more talented guys and picked up on some that a couple of people glossed over, particularly Wingo and Mahogany, which brings me to the team I want to gloss over the most, but unfortunately I can't. Green Bay Packers.
I don't like their draft no matter what they did. I'm just going to tell you that.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I will say this. No, if this was your favorite draft, so I haven't looked at it too much. But before you get into it, I was not a huge fan of Jordan Morgan. I don't dislike Jordan Morgan, but I had a 2nd round grade on him. Javon Bullard I loved. Edgerrin Cooper I really liked. Marshawn Lloyd I really like. Later in the draft, it's hit or miss a little bit. I liked Katana Oladipo, and I think Kalen King is a guy who was early on in the process, was a guy who was getting day 1, day 2 talk. Yeah, and it's seeing him in the 7th round, that I don't like that. Hopefully, because he's bad.
Well, he didn't look good at the Senior Bowl. You mentioned that earlier. He really got exposed there. I think defensive back, particularly cornerback, when you're on an island a lot of times, in the Senior Bowl, that particular,
especially with this year's wide receiver talent, it was tough on those corners.
It was.
That's where Quinyon Mitchell stood out. You saw all the other corners getting burned, and then Quinyon Mitchell would come out there every time and shut people down, and you're like, who is this guy?
Right. But I think that particular exercise, it skews more towards receivers anyway. But I think defensive back, particularly cornerback, I'm not going to say it's all about your confidence, but your confidence has a lot to do, I believe, with your ability to create and sustain, a mindset of being successful, even when you're facing sometimes where you're going to get beat. You're going to get beat. It happens to everybody. Deion Sanders got beat. Not often. Can't really remember how many times, but it happens.
He got beat more on his missed tackles.
No doubt. But it's like basketball. Everybody gets dunked on. It happens. So I think his confidence dropped a lot as the season wore on, and definitely he didn't quite look the same as he did the year before. That being said, you get with good coaches, you get an assistant. Maybe he's someone that's on the practice squad, but it's another active body and somebody that at one point, as you just earlier mentioned, had 1st round notoriety, which means he has 1st round talent at the very least. It just has to be, reinvigorated and tapped into. So to be on a team that doesn't need you right away, and you're the last pick in their draft class, gives you some time to again purge some of those demons, exercise of them, get that reinvigorate, restore that confidence, and be able to contribute. And not only that, but you'll contribute to a team even more so, give them that hometown discount because they took a flyer on you. They had enough faith to take you. But you weren't as high on Morgan. I had him like low 1st round, early 2nd round, so about the same deal. But I do like the fact that he played so well after his ACL injury. He came back and did a very good job. If you look at Arizona,
he played well in the Senior Bowl. Now he still got beat, but
it's going to happen. And I think he's not alt. He's not somebody that he's not a person you say this is definitively the next 10 years, but he's someone you're like, oh, we can play with him. And then he has a ceiling. I don't know how high or low it is, and he has a solid floor. I think it's something and someone that with given time could be a solid. I like kind of compare him to. I'm trying to think the left tackle the Bears had that got in free agency from the Saints a few years back. And then I think
Armstead?
Yeah.
Or
yeah, he's
Jerome Bushrod. Bushrod wasn't
Bushrod. Thank you. It's more Bushrod. I see him as more like a Bushrod type, and that's someone that
go through the brain files.
No, I feel you, and that's why I throw it out there because I know at some point between your Rolodex and mine, one of us will figure it out. But yeah, he kind of reminds me of someone like him who's like you're a NFL starter. Are you a Pro Bowler? Maybe not. Do you have to be? No. You just need to be really good and at least do your job. And I think he can do his job. I think he's enough athleticism and he's in that agility he has. I think it'll fit. And I think you have a young enough quarterback to where, someone that can move when your quarterback moves. Someone that has that agility. I don't think he's not a stiff. He's got good hips. He bends pretty well. So I think he'll just get better, and better and better, particularly after the injury. Edgerrin Cooper, he's been on my radar for the last couple of years, man.
That guy can fly.
Dude, yeah, man. And this past year, he put it all together, man. I think he had 17 tackles for loss, I think 8 or 10 sacks. It was something. He didn't even really sack. It wasn't really his thing this first couple of years at A&M. And this year, he just turned it on. Sacks, passes defended, forced fumble. Like he was every measure, that you want. This dude was reaching and attaining and just tackling and just so decisive. He is a legitimate NFL linebacker. I think he can play all three positions, to be quite honest with you, in the linebacking positions. And Texas A&M, just like Penn State, just a history of really good linebackers that come through those schools. And I think he, if nothing else, he can probably be a pivotal person and maybe bring that resurgence back to that position for the Aggies. But yeah, I like Edgerrin Cooper a lot.
We don't want that to happen, Glynn. Just to be clear here.
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, for Texas A&M, I don't want him doing it for the Packers, but unfortunately, he's going to at least be here for 3 to 4 years.
He could start out slow, look like a bust, get traded, and then go revitalize his career somewhere else. Now, they did take 3 safeties too. Now that was interesting to me. They really, to me, that's telling me that was a reaction. They're scared of our wide receivers.
Well, ours, Minnesota's.
Detroit's not bad. Did Detroit draft a wide receiver? That's something I don't know off the top of my head. They didn't. That's the surprising thing. Detroit is a team that if they would, this was a perfect year for them, in my opinion. I think to draft a wide receiver. Jamison Williams is coming on slow. This is now entering year 3, and he hasn't done much. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown just got paid. We had the best wide receiver draft class I ever seen. Now 24, I would have taken Terry and Arnold, but instead of doubling down.
Right.
I probably would have went with a wide receiver there in the second.
I would have too, but here's the thing: there's so many wide receivers. There
but
may be one that's out there free.
They never went to it.
If you want a free agency, they may be able to trade for one. I mean, T. Higgins is still a little annoyed.
Oh man, the name was on my tongue when you said it. Yeah, I was like, if they get T. Higgins, I'd be mad.
Exactly. So I'm not putting anything past those guys. But yeah, overall, I really think that the division showed well in the draft. I think it's going to show well when the season begins. Last year, arguably, it was the second or third best division in all of football, and I don't think it's shrunk from that at all. If anything else, I think it's with the Bears' resurgence and what the Bears have done. I think the NFC North looks to be right up there with the AFC North. I think those teams have a little bit more depth and a little more accomplished in terms of the quarterbacking position.
Yep.
But potentially speaking, those are 2 of the tougher divisions without a doubt.
I mean, that's probably my biggest worry right now is we finally got our GM. It looks like we finally got our franchise quarterback now, and things are looking up for the Bears. But when you look around the division, you're like, all right, well, who's going to be that team that is just the perennial loser? Because the Lions are now really good. The Lions have arguably the only GM right now that I would say, because I love Ryan. I'm a huge fan of Ryan Poles. I think most people know that. My confidence in him has been up there for years now. Just some of the courage it's taken for him to do some of the moves he's made, trading away Khalil Mack when he first got here. All of this while losing on the field. and having the
Right.
confidence to still continue with his plan and have faith in it. I love what he does, but Brad Holmes is right up there. And
Yep.
then when you go to the Packers and the Vikings, I'm not as sold on their GMs, but there's still the way they do things overall in the roster. You got and what they have that neither us or Detroit have are long-term play callers on the offensive side of the ball that are
Yep.
top 10 in the league. LaFleur, I believe, is a top 5 play caller. He's up there with Shanahan, and a lot of people are like, oh, they got another special quarterback. I think a lot of that has to do with Matt LaFleur and what a great play caller he is. And the Vikings, I think Kevin O'Connell could be right there. So you have
It's
two
top 10.
killer play callers that are top 10 that are going to be those guys are going to field good offenses in this league, no matter what
Mm.
happens at the quarterback position or what they do around the team. And then the Lions still have Ben Johnson. He hasn't went anywhere yet. So this division is just it's a slaughterhouse right now. And that
Yes.
scares me that we're finally turning around. We
Yes.
should be able to dominate the division for 10 years, but if all the other three teams are really good too, it's just going to be a slugfest, and not any of us four are going to run through the division like the Packers have in the past.
No, I think that's what you're going to see. You're going to see look like the AFC North, where any given year, any one of those teams is probably going to be in the AFC Championship game. Last year was the Ravens. A few years back it was Cincinnati Bengals. I think this year it can be the Ravens again. I think with the Bears and the NFC conference, I think the next 5 years, I think 3 of the Super Bowl representatives will come from our division.
Oh man, I love
Like,
that. I'm
or
not going to work for it, but hey, let's get it. I mean that when you look at the AFC North at the end of the year every year, especially the last 2 or 3 years, 2-3 games to go, even 4 games to go. From the top, the first place team to the fourth place game team, there's like 1 to 2 game separation, and that's
right,
it. And it's like so
crazy.
the first place team and the first place team is then going to play the last place team, and they play them at least once, and you're only 2 games back. So if you can win your way in, like it's crazy. And I don't realistically, I don't want the NFC North to wind up like that. I'd rather us cruise into the playoffs,
Right,
or
right.
get a wild card or something. But yeah, it's going to be a slugfest, and I think it's going to be great football. And right now, I don't want to see it, but in the moment, I think we'll all love it, seeing real meaningful football in
Yes,
Chicago again, and hopefully
exactly.
we can come out on the winning side of some of those.
Yeah, the games will matter and will matter. And we won't be playing spoiler. It'll be like, no, we're being advocates for ourselves, not for anybody else.
Mm.
So yeah, man, it's going to be interesting. And it's I won't say it's how you want it to be, but as a fan of football, you know, it just whets your appetite. It really does, and it makes you look forward. And again, these are games. These are 6 games. That you're playing. So it's a third of your season is is wound within your own division, and every game is going to matter. It's going to be kind of like college football, where every game matters in a sense for you to be able to get to where you need to go to. And not saying that they didn't matter in the past, but they'll have more relevance now.
A lot more, especially if all 4 teams stay relatively healthy and
Yeah.
live up to their potential, and that means all 4 teams are going to be in it. But even if one of the teams, say the Vikings, do slip off a little bit, the end of the year they still would have a lot to fight for, especially if, say, Sam Darnold didn't work out and they ended up inserting JJ McCarthy into it, and he's starting to show some potential. They're going to be fighting for their lives. But I did want to mention Sam Darnold because you talked about him earlier and something slipped my mind. I think he's a guy who, in San Francisco last year, if he would have ended up starting, if something would have happened to Brock Purdy, I think he would have significantly raised his value, because I think in San Francisco, he could have put up some numbers and won some games.
Mhm.
And I don't think there would have been a big drop off from Brock Purdy. And I'm not a huge Brock Purdy guy, but it's not a shot at Brock Purdy. It's a compliment to the San Francisco
Yep.
system,
Yep.
all of it together,
Structure.
the offensive line, the weapons, the play caller, they have it all. And when you have that, the quarterback is just another cog in the machine, and it's
Yep.
not all dependent upon that guy. And that's why the 49ers are going to remain being good. And that's what I don't want to see happen in Minnesota and Green Bay.
Feel you.
See it. Glenn, hey, thank you so much for coming on, Glenn. Always a pleasure talking football with you, my man. Well, definitely, you're welcome anytime. Come on.
Oh, no doubt, bro. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me. And we got a lot to talk about during off season, man. I can't wait.
100%.